What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get In Podcast, where we talk about all the things that excite us, piss us off, and all the above in the gaming industry. I'm your host, Stu, with my guest, Matt, who is actually filling in for Nick while he's on vacation. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing good. I just wanted to clarify one thing you said, filling in. I prefer the term taking over.
My mistake.
So yeah, let's just make sure everybody knows I am now the leader. I am the host.
Okay, well, if anything, I'm the leader and host. You're the co-host,
Okay.
but,
Just for tonight, just for today, I'll be the co-host. All right.
well, that's very generous of you. Today, speaking of generosity, or lack thereof, rather, we are talking about Dark Souls. Uh, a Souls
Yeah.
series in general. What are your thoughts, just quick thoughts overall of what it is?
Okay. So what it is probably one of the most influential and just overall incredible series of all time. And that's why I'm so excited to talk about this today because it's just has such a very dear place in my heart. Probably my favorite game series of all time, I would say, and it's just had an astronomical impact on the gaming industry in general, which we'll talk about later. And basically, what it is, you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said it was the antithesis of generosity, which is pretty much a good way to describe it. It's brutal, it's unforgiving,
Hmm.
it's fun as hell, and it is just beautiful. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it.
Beautiful destruction. I agree.
Yes.
We have been friends for quite a number of years at this point. It's probably what 14, going on 15.
Probably, I would say it's close to 14 at this point. Just since we were little kids, honestly, it's been pretty cool.
I remember when your little brother didn't exist. He wasn't even a thought in the heads of us. He.
Sometimes I forget he exists still. No,
Well, that's probably
I'm
something you need
just kidding.
therapy for. But anyway, I've known you for a long time. We've been playing video games together for a long time, and one of the games that we've really connected on is the Souls
Mm,
series. And I don't know necessarily if that's us suffering through them and kind of finding comfort in each other's pain. I don't know if that is just speaks to the volume of it being a co-op game or whatever you might be. But I am a massive fan of the Souls games. Would not trade it for anything. My bread and butter is definitely, first person shooters, Rainbow Six Siege,
mhm.
maybe Call of Duty, but Souls have such a special place in my heart, or in my soul even, that
I see what you did there.
thanks. You can't replace, and I wouldn't want to replace it. There's just, like you said, they're so brutal and they're unforgiving. And at the end of the day, in most scenarios, it's not the game that's messed up. It's you make an error. Player themselves makes an error, which then leads to dying or screwing something up. And I
Yeah.
love the raw talent and the skill and the grind that you need to do to be able to get to a point where you are efficient enough in the game that you can survive and help other people and just not have as big of a struggle as when you first start off.
Fully agree. You know what? It's unlike any other game because you're playing Call of Duty or Rainbow Six Siege. It's so easy to be like, oh my goodness, the lag just I only died because of the lag,
Right.
right? So in Dark Souls, with the exception of a few things that we'll talk about later, there's really not a lot of room for blaming anything else besides yourself
Hmm.
on your own, I guess, level of skill in the video game.
Right.
It's a video game that is designed around rewarding your skill, right?
Hmm.
So as you grow and as you get better, it's just an amazing process that that you witness because your first Dark Souls game. Well, first I should ask you, what was your first Dark Souls game you played?
My first game was Dark Souls 2, which is actually kind of the black sheep of the family, I would argue. There's a lot of controversy and a lot of hate towards that game in particular due to the
Yeah.
fact that, the head guy, whose name is, and excuse me for butchering this, but Hidetaka Miyazaki. I think I did okay pronouncing that.
Yeah, yeah.
He, you
I
know,
think that's exactly right. Yeah.
he was really the brains behind the Souls series, and he really had the vision for what it was supposed to be. And he didn't do Dark Souls 2. He had his hands out of that one. He did Demon Souls, he did Dark Souls 1, he did Dark Souls 3, he did Bloodborne, he did Sekiro, right? Sekiro?
Yes, he
He did
did.
that one. So he's really kind of the grandfather, or just the father of the series in and of itself. So Dark Souls 2 got hate for that. But, while I love all the other games, Dark Souls 2 is my favorite. We have a theory for that, which we will get into later. But for sure, Dark Souls 2 it's the greatest one. I'm going to argue that. What about you?
Well, you know what's funny is that I don't even know if I've told you this before, but Dark Souls 2 is actually the first game I played in the series.
Okay.
Yeah, so I bought the game when it was on sale on the Microsoft Store, just impulse bought it, right? Because
Hmm.
I'd always heard people say like, "Oh, it's great," and I love RPGs, right? And I was like, "Oh, I figured I'd love it."
Right.
And then I logged in and started my character. I was sort of confused as to what was going on, which I mean, after thousands of hours later, I still am confused as to what's
Yeah,
going on,
makes sense.
but I still love it. But I logged in and I was walking around. And I was like, this is sort of cool though. I mean, I like it. And then I walked straight from Majula over to the High Tower Flame
Ooh.
and just got destroyed
Yeah,
by the knights in
atomized,
that zone, right?
destroyed.
Because
Yeah.
I didn't know, like, the whole pattern of, like, the locking on, the dodging, the stamina management, everything that goes into the game that makes it the way it is. I wasn't familiar with it.
Hmm.
So, I just got destroyed so many times that I was like, "You know what? Screw this. I'm never playing it again." I installed it from my Xbox. I uninstalled it from my Xbox
Right.
and never touched the series again until Bloodborne came out, and that was the game that I played from FromSoft that made me fall in love with the Dark Souls game
Hmm.
style and the series in general. And I put so many hours into Bloodborne. That was just like, I felt like I played games before that, and I really loved them, but that was the first game that just sucked me into that level.
Right.
To this day, I still say that that's definitely my number one video game of all time. It's just fantastic.
That's definitely
So
saying something. You've been alive on this earth for quite a while.
yeah,
We don't say ages on this podcast, by the way. We kind of keep it low key. I could be any age.
yeah,
But
you could be.
you've been around for a while. You've played a good number of video games, as have I. And to say that Bloodborne is your favorite of all time is no small feat.
No, and I've played a lot of video games, so I'm saying that confidently and honestly. It will always be my answer is unchanging when people ask what my favorite game is. It's always instantly Bloodborne. It's just that good.
Yeah, you recently dragged me into that game
I
after
did.
a long while of not playing it, just mainly due to the fact I didn't have access to play it. I didn't have a PS4.
Yeah.
Um, but that was a really fun game. I mean, I really enjoyed the similarities with the other Souls games, the
Mhm.
differences from the other Souls games, just the atmosphere. I mean, I would argue that that Bloodborne probably has the best atmosphere out of all of them.
Oh, 100%. It's the soundtrack is incredible.
Hmm.
Just the enemy design is incredible. Just the environments, like that whole sort of Victorian London sort of thing they're going
Right.
for. There's just so many diverse things you come across. Like, and the DLC for Bloodborne was amazing. It was incredible because then you got all these new locations, like the fishing hamlet, where you're so used to seeing like this, like a bloodied city sort of vibe to it, and
Right.
then all of a sudden you're in this like this fishing village with aliens all around you. Like, it's just insane,
Yeah,
but
I
it
gotta
sucks you
say,
in.
the aliens threw me for a loop the first time I went. I was not
Yeah.
expecting it. You didn't warn me. Thankfully, you didn't warn me. But
Yeah.
I was scared actually. I was legitimately terrified, and I remember
Yeah.
particularly because of how scary it was. I was like, Matt, this spot, this tree, this is my new home. I am not moving from this spot until you come get me. I was
Okay, that's not
terrified,
true.
dude.
You know what was cool though is that you can tell that you were a Souls fan, like, because we put so many hours into other games
Hmm.
before we started playing Bloodborne in the Souls series, and to see you come in there, like, you obviously you excelled right from the start. Like, you were doing very well right from the
I'm
beginning.
pretty great. What can I say?
Yeah, unlike, some other people that I've played through it with that just get absolutely destroyed. Like, they're still not like, I like playing with people, but those people just aren't good, right? You can
Hmm.
tell you were a veteran to the series, so it was more seamless.
Right.
That was pretty cool. Another thing about that I like about Miyazaki is that just as a quick piece of trivia, I won't go too long on this, but you can see all of his inspirations in his video games so well, right? Like,
Hmm.
he is such a fan of Western culture. So it really feels like a Japanese RPG set to like a Western style of RPG, which is really cool. So
Right.
the theme he went for in Bloodborne was actually by a writer named H.P. Lovecraft, right? Which I personally really enjoy his works. I've read a lot of them,
Okay.
and it's like the same exact vibe as his books. And he was interviewed as saying that that was a major source for the inspiration for Bloodborne, and then you just see that so clearly. So I really respect him as a developer because he puts so much attention into every little detail to give you that sort of experience that he's looking to let you be a part of.
Hmm. I mean, I was
Really,
certainly
really
blown
cool.
away. I have no qualms about saying it's definitely the best. It was the most impactful game. It definitely dragged you in Not
Mhm.
necessarily more engaging, but just the atmosphere, the composition. Like in every, Souls game, in my opinion, the music's fantastic. And there's no game, in my opinion, that really drags you into the depths because of the music. I mean, you could have a boss fight that's just good, right? But then you have the
Yeah.
music on top of that. Or if you have a boss
Mhm.
fight with multiple phases and the music changes and gets more intense
Oh
as the
my
phase
goodness.
changes. Like it's the little things like that that in Dark Souls add up to make it just a phenomenal
Well, the Dark Souls soundtrack is unlike any I've ever heard. Like, it's just on a level of quality that you really don't hear that much in
hmm
most video games, in my opinion. Like, a lot of great games like Witcher 3, they had a great soundtrack. I mean, what are some others? I mean, like, the Fallout series, I have a lot of grips with Bethesda, but, they have a really good soundtrack, a lot of
Right.
1940s type stuff, which is pretty cool. But Dark Souls just blows me away with its,
Yep.
orchestra bits, and it's just so good, and I can't talk about the Dark Souls soundtrack without mentioning a specific encounter from Dark Souls, that their soundtrack takes it to another level. And that's with anybody who's played the whole series, has played Dark Souls 1 and has fought Gwyn, the god of thunder who you fight him at the very end, he's throwing
hmm
lightning spears at you, it's intense, it's awesome. Um, and then you go through this whole journey and you play Dark Souls 3, and I mean, spoiler alert for anybody, but I mean, you know what? The game's been out for a couple of years, so you should have played it by now. I'm just gonna say it. The You fight the soul of Cinder at the end of Dark Souls 3, and the music is so cool. And there's one point at the final phase of the boss where he starts using the move set from Gwyn from the first game,
yeah.
and then you hear Gwyn's theme come on to play over your speakers. And I remember so clearly the first time I ever fought him, and I recognized that soundtrack, and then I saw the movements he was doing. I had chills through my whole body, and not many games can really do that.
Right.
And it takes a really special developer to make something like that.
I agree completely. There's something about the atmosphere that's created with music and a lot of these environments that you're cast into that just change the dynamic of the fight, of your experience with it, what you take away from it. I mean, they've been like that since Demon Souls. So
Yeah,
let's
well, you
break
know
that.
what?
Let's break
I
that down.
Yeah,
Let's move there.
Demon
So Demon
Souls.
Souls was the first one in the series. Came out February 5th, 2009, and it only came out on PlayStation. I myself have no experience with Demon Souls. Like I've seen a little gameplay, but I've never held a controller and actually played the game. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
that's the same for you, correct?
Yeah, I haven't played it. I just haven't had the opportunity. I didn't own a PS3, and I don't even know if it's available backwards compatibility on PS4 now, but I just never played it.
Right. So I mean, it definitely is it's the one that sticks out to at least the veterans of these series is like that's the kind of the epitome, and I think each game has kind of tried to go back to that. I mean, part of the issues with Demon Souls is it was so buggy, and
Yeah.
Smosh Gaming, they did a bit on it a while ago that was hilarious and kind of just stuck with me throughout the entire series. They had said that the bugs are just an extra feature in the game that make it more. And I thought it was really funny
Yeah.
because, like we kind of said earlier, there's no real game breaking bugs. Like, oftentimes you'll have weapons clip through walls or pillars or just whatever, which technically speaking shouldn't happen, but it's Dark Souls. You just
Mhm.
kind of have to roll with the punches. You have to get used
It's just
to
part of
that
it.
type of mechanic, right? Like your guy will get stuck hitting the wall, but then the enemy's sword will go through the wall and hit you. Like it's Dark
Yeah.
Souls. You get used to it. That's really where it started. You definitely have those in all the games though. Like Dark Souls 1 came out in 2011. September 22nd,
Mhm.
2011 came out on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Microsoft Windows. Well, when it was then remastered this last year, it came out on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. I have mixed feelings about remastering these games. I think in a lot of the different games, like it's not needed, right? Like it'd be kind of cool to get a remaster of Demon Souls just because it was such a smaller game that not many people knew about. Now
Yeah.
that it has a much larger crowd, it would probably do pretty well, and a lot of people would like that.
I think it would too. I would love to see a Demon Souls remaster because then I could play it. I just know that there's a lot of technical problems that sort of weigh the game down,
hmm
and that's the one reason why I loved Dark Souls Remastered. A lot of people sort of thought that it was just a steal, like a cash grab, because they
Right.
really didn't change that much. They just made the textures a little more high definition.
hmm
But you know what? It's the smoothest playing version of Dark Souls 1 that you'll find. And that's just the truth. Like in Dark Souls 1, I don't know how far you ever gotten it, but do you remember Blight Town?
Oh yes, do I
Oh my
remember
goodness.
Blighttown?
everyone who played Dark Souls the first time around on the 360 just hated Blighttown because you get down there and it's a hard zone. Like there's a lot of people throwing rocks at you. There's mosquitoes everywhere, it's sucking your blood out. There's all these things going on, and then all the time, the biggest boss in that whole area is the camera, dude.
Yep.
It's going down to 15 frames per second, sometimes even 10 frames per second, and it just makes the whole thing unplayable. And you know what? I didn't even mention you're also getting poisoned the whole time,
Oh yes, it's
right?
a
So
lovely place.
that made a lot of people actually quit the game, right? So now when you go back into Dark Souls Remastered and you go down to Blighttown and the frame rate is constant and you're able to get through the region a lot quicker, it just makes it a whole I would buy the game just for that, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, we've discussed this before. Frame rate in this style of game is so important. Bad frame rate, I mean, just frame rate in general is life and death. If you have bad frame rate, if you aren't able to see something happening, right, like a move happening or whatever,
Mhm.
you're gonna get hit, and that hit
You're
could
dead.
potentially be fatal, right? And especially in these games, you usually don't want to get hit because it kills you. Um,
Yeah, most likely. Either in one or two hits, you're dead.
One of the mechanics that's heavily used in the game is something called iframes, and iframe stands for invincibility frames. And there's different ways to get invincibility frames. The primary one is rolling. If you dodge, there's a small window that gives you iframes that even if you were to be hit, it never connects. It doesn't connect. It doesn't hit you. You don't take damage. You
Mhm.
go on. You just keep fighting. There are other things like some weapons can give you iframes and whatnot, but iframes pretty much don't exist when the frames are low. So if you have low frames, you can't have iframes, which means you're gonna get hit, which means you could die. So having a remaster that actually improves the frame rate, especially in Blighttown. Blighttown was horrible. Absolutely
Oh,
hate
it's
going through
terrible.
it. Even now I hate
I
going
have
through it.
nightmares. I have nightmares still to this day.
So that's in my opinion, the only scenario that I'd like to see a remaster where it improves the performance of the game. And then at that point, you're not getting killed by something that's out of your control.
I 100% agree. I would really love to see a remaster of Demon's Souls, though. That would be awesome.
I
Because
agree, yeah.
I do feel sort of bad as someone who, I consider myself as a huge Dark Souls fan. I
Hmm.
played every single entry in the series extensively. I just haven't played Demon Souls.
Right.
And I sort of feel like if I'm as huge of a fan as I am of the series, I should definitely play the game. But it's just hard. It's like, how do I get my hands on it at this point? You know?
Right. No, I agree 100%. I mean, you had to buy a PS3, you got to find the game. And I don't think they
Yeah.
really sold that many, so there's not that many floating around. But
Yeah, that's why I'm begging for a remaster. FromSoft, if by some miracle you're hearing this, please make a remaster of Demon Souls. I will buy 3 copies just to support you guys.
you know what? I'll second that. I'll buy six or three, so six total.
Okay,
Um,
good.
so the next entry in the series is Dark Souls 2, which came out March 11th,
It's your
2014.
game.
This is my game. I played it on an Xbox One actually. It initially launched on PlayStation 3 and 4, Xbox 360 and Xbox One, and then Microsoft Windows. The first version I had was actually the last version of the game. It was called Scholar of the First Sin. It was
Mhm,
essentially just the DLC version. It had all the DLC in it. I have a love-hate relationship with that game,
mhm.
as does anyone
A lot of people do. A lot of
with
people
their
do.
first game, which we'll actually talk about after. But that game is my favorite, although there's a lot of controversy with that game among the Souls community.
Yeah, I would say.
I mean, we talked about it earlier, so I don't know. I love it. I think it's gonna forever be my favorite, but definitely
But
not
you know what?
everyone's
The
opinion.
the thing is with Dark Souls 2 though is that even the worst quote unquote Dark Souls game is still better than pretty much 90% of other games in my
No,
opinion.
I would definitely. That's a very good statement. That makes a lot of sense, at least for a veteran, right? I mean, you have people just are trash of the game who need to get good and they can't, so they
Yeah,
hate
but
it.
you know what? It's a love-hate relationship because they still like it. It's just that they like to complain about some of the mechanics. Like, I mean, there are some things to be said, and this is better suited for a review video. But just one
Hmm.
thing off the top of my head is just like the weapon degradation was so intense in Dark
Yeah,
Souls 2,
yeah,
and everything was so slow. I totally understand why people wouldn't make that their favorite, but it's still a great game.
right. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where they're all games, all the Souls series differ slightly. There's something different about it, and I like that because if they were all the same, I don't know, man. I just feel like I would get bored.
Yeah, dude,
There's so much
it'd be terrible.
replayability with the Souls series. I mean, you have the new game pluses up to level 99. You have
Yeah.
so much that you can do. You can completely change your character. You can use a different weapon, different skill set. there's infinite combinations, but I feel like if every
Mhm.
game was the same, every game mechanic wise was the same, it moved the same,
Yeah.
felt the same, like it would just feel like a DLC. Why am I spending another $60 on the same exact thing?
Yeah, well, you'll never get the Call of Duty syndrome in Dark Souls, I guarantee it, because each world is just hand built from the ground up. There are nods to the other games, but each one is its own sort of vibe and its
Right.
own sort of feeling. Like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2 and 3 and Bloodborne and Sekiro, they all feel like completely different games while all having the same DNA
Right.
of this of one game, which is the way it should be if you're doing sequels to a game.
Hmm.
So I'm a huge fan of the series and what they do with it. And it
Right.
makes each purchase like you don't feel like, oh man, like they could this is just glorified DLC for the last one. No, like you feel like, wow, this is hundreds of hours of content in a completely new experience.
No, I agree. Your game, Bloodborne, up next. That's the next iteration in the series. Came out March 24th, 2015 on PlayStation
Mhm.
4 only.
Yes,
Te-
it did.
You had dragged me into that game.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. Still need to finish it, so you need to drag me back.
Dragging I don't know if I dragged you into it, more of like you sort of were just racing to play it because you were
Right.
always wanting to play it and you finally had the
That's true.
opportunity to play it, which the stars aligned. And you know what? That's the thing, because I'm telling you, I bought a PlayStation 4 just for Bloodborne
Hmm.
because it looked so good. I only had an Xbox One, and then I see this coming out, and I hear that it's from Software, and then it has the Dark Souls elements, and it has this sort of Victorian London, sort of Van Helsing sort of vibe to it. I'm like,
Hmm.
"Oh my goodness, this is awesome." So I literally bought a PlayStation 4 just for the game, and you know what? I do it again. To me, that PlayStation 4 that's sitting down in my living room, that's a Bloodborne machine exclusively. And still, that's the only game I really play on it.
Right. God of
It's
War.
so
You need to
good.
play that game with you. Just
You know
saying.
what? Yeah, you're right. That's another great
But
one.
anyway, it's one of those things where when Bloodborne came out, you got it right away, didn't you? Like pretty much release date.
You know what? I got it probably about luckily, actually, I bought it about 8, 9 months after
Oh,
it
okay. All
released,
right.
which was good for me because I never encountered some of the gripes that people had with it towards the beginning. Like, it had ridiculously long loading screens apparently in the
Ooh,
beginning,
that sucks.
and I never experienced that because I got an updated version of it that ran perfectly right from the start.
Hmm.
So
Well, regardless, I remember, you getting that game, and that was when you played it. Like you've been heavy into it pretty much since you've played it.
mhm.
Those first few months of you having it, that is all you ever talked about. And like I
Yeah.
loved seeing that. I loved seeing that passion, that drive and desire to play that game and that game alone. I hadn't seen that before. And
Yeah.
there's nothing quite like playing a game with a friend who is heavily passionate about that game, who can
Mhm.
walk you through everything, show you all the little secrets. You know the lore, the best out of that game.
I
You
mean,
just, I remember, I remember
to the
playing that
best of my
game.
ability.
Well, yeah, lore's a little complicated, but there was little things that had I gone by, through it by myself, I would have missed, or I would have
Yeah.
struggled, or this. So having you there really impacted me playing that game.
I completely get it, and you know what? That's the same way I feel about you with Dark Souls 2, because we're playing through that. I think we're playing through the whole game start to finish for the first time currently, right?
Correct.
Because we've played through it before, but we haven't played through the entire thing before
Hmm.
together. So we're doing that now, and there's like so many things that I would miss. Where you're like, oh, go back here and get this, and I would never have known it. And
Right.
that's just because that is your favorite of the series, and something that I really wanted to talk about, and something that we had talked about before. When we were trying to plan this out, was what makes this series so personal to you? Like the first game, and we think it's the first game you play is the one that just gets bonded to you. Like that
Hmm.
just becomes a part of you. And no matter what, like for you, like your first game being Dark Souls 2, even though it's the game that probably the whole Dark Souls community would list last on the list in terms of like their favorites, that just seems to be the overall thing. It's your favorite because it was your first. And that was the
Right.
first sort of your first iteration into this world. And I think that's amazing that they do that. Like for me with Bloodborne, like that was my first game in the Dark Souls series that I really got into and that
Hmm.
really sucked me in. And to this day, it's still my favorite. And I
Right.
think that's just an amazing thing that your first experience with it is always your favorite and your most nostalgic.
And it's funny because I don't think that was their intention. Right? I don't think any developer of a video game is like, you know what, I'm gonna make this game their, because how can they cater to each individual person, right? I think
Mhm.
the way Dark Souls is, like just the way that it exists in the gaming world, it's and everything gets easier over time, right?
Hmm.
And there's a high learning curve with the Souls series, but in
Yeah.
general, they're all pretty tied together. The way movement more or less works, the way just things interact with each other in general are the same throughout the games. So that first game, when you're learning everything, when you're learning how to move, when you're learning how to fight, when you're learning just how to interact with the world itself, you struggle and it sucks. And you've really got to give it time to be able to hammer that out. And when you do, when you finally learn it, it's like, oh my goodness, I can play the game and not do bad.
Yeah.
And then you play another game. So like, I played Dark Souls 3. I got heavy into that after Dark Souls 2. It was
Hmm.
easier, right? And there's that argument that a lot of people go, oh, well, Dark Souls 3 is the easiest one they've made. Like, no, you're just better.
That's
You've
exactly
you've
right.
gotten
That's a
better
hundred
at the
percent.
game.
Because we've spent by the time I played Dark Souls 3, I had already put hundreds and hundreds of hours into Bloodborne,
Mm-hmm.
and then started playing Dark Souls 2 again. And then to go into Dark Souls 3, like you're right, that was my initial thought. Like upon completing it, I was like, like this was amazing. But I mean, it definitely feels like maybe they're trying to cater to the casual audience a little bit more. It's maybe a little less challenging as a whole
Mm-hmm.
than the previous Dark Souls games. But then I had my one friend start it, right? And he had never played a Dark Souls game before.
His poor soul.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I'm like, "Well, don't worry, man, this is the easiest the series has been." And he's like, "Okay, well, I mean, if this is the easiest one, then let's go in," right? And then he gets on the mic with me and he's like, "What are you talking about? This is not an he's like, "This is not the easiest." He's like, "I can't even get to the first boss in the in the area because these hollow knights keep attacking me." And then I'm like laughing, like I'm like, "These are like the easiest things you'll fight in the whole game." But then I realized something. I was like, Dark Souls 3 is not the easiest thing in the game. It's just the one that the whole Dark Souls community has played last. So we already are so skilled at the game. We've already put hundreds of hours into the game that I mean, it's going to be a little easier for us, but that's the beauty of the game. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I wanted to talk about just what makes Dark Souls so rewarding as opposed to other games. Like what are your thoughts on that? Like what makes it so engrossing and just a rewarding experience that really sticks with you?
I think a huge thing about Dark Souls that after playing other games I've come to appreciate is the fact that for the most part, Dark Souls is fair. And, there are certainly unbalanced things like weapons, but you have the ability to use that to your advantage, right? There's not many instances in Dark Souls where it's like, oh, yep, that's all the game. The game killed me. There's nothing I could have done differently. In general, it's you. If you
Yeah.
die, it's most likely your fault. So it comes down to player skill, player awareness, experience. All of that adds up to make you a better Souls player. And that's what I really appreciate from this game.
Yeah, I really don't think you can blame much beside yourself when you die in Dark Souls. Like, sure, I mean there are some things like you've lost the ability to complain about the frame rate in Dark Souls One because with the remaster, that's not something you can blame. Like, oh, I only died in Blighttown because of the frame rate. Like that's out of it. And I mean the only thing that I would say is still constant in the game is um the camera problems. It's just very I don't know. You ever been fighting a boss and then the camera just kills you?
Oh, all the time. All the time.
It's so frustrating.
For sure. I think another thing I love about the Souls game, I mentioned it before, but things add on each other, right? So, you played your first Souls game, you suffer, it sucks, you don't do well, and then eventually you start getting the hang of it, and then you play the next game
Yeah.
better and it's easier for you. And now you
Mhm.
still, have to learn monster movesets, boss movesets, learn the world, but the overall mechanics are relatively the same. There's not a huge difference between the two. Um, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like for instance, if we talk about Dark Souls 3, which, came out in when was that? March 24th, 2016. So that was about 2 years after Dark Souls 2. It was a year after Bloodborne. And Dark Souls 3 only came on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Microsoft Windows. Kind of like you said with your friend, you had the moment where, oh yeah, Dark Souls 3 is the easiest one. He came in and was like, dude, what the heck are you talking about? This isn't easy at all. You came to the realization of, hey, this is not necessarily easier, I'm just better. I had a
Mhm.
similar interaction with my brother, my twin. His first game in the series, and I think actually his only, I don't think he stuck with it. was Dark Souls 3. And he bought it, and I was like, look, dude, you won't like this game right away. It's not going to be enjoyable for you.
Yeah.
You have to stick with it, give it 3 days, and if you still hate it, then you're allowed to get it. But you have to give Dark Souls a chance. You have to
Yeah.
learn, otherwise you're not going to play well.
But you will return. And that's the thing about Dark Souls is like it'll destroy you, but you'll keep coming back for more because you like the pain. You're a masochist at this point, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what I noticed
Yeah.
with Bloodborne, right? The first game I played in the whole series, right? I played Bloodborne and I got to the cleric beast, which is the first optional boss you fight, right? And I must have gotten beaten by this thing brutally like 20, 25 times at least, right? Like I was
Mm-hmm.
raging. Like my palms were sweating and I was raging.
Knees weak,
But I was
arms are
so
heavy.
yes, exactly. Mom spaghetti, the whole deal, right? And then but then when I finally beat it, I remember it was 2 in the morning. I jumped up from my chair and I literally just screamed. Like I was like, "Ah!" Like I was just so
Mm-hmm.
crazy, like passionate that I beat it. And then I realized I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this game is amazing."
I
Like
mean,
this is
that's another, tick mark in Souls boxes. There's not many games that can bring the satisfaction that Dark Souls does. And the only reason Dark Souls can bring that satisfaction is because you suffer so much. Like, it's such a difficult game.
it really is.
You
But
you could spend easily hours on one boss, and I've done that. And then you
me too.
finally beat it, and it's like, dude, I did it.
And you feel
Wow.
so accomplished.
There's no game I've played that makes me feel like that.
I would agree with you. Like and I don't know if you feel the same way, but I mean I know you really like first person shooters, that's your thing. But
Yep.
for me personally, it's like I go onto a first person shooter like Call of Duty, like the new Modern Warfare, and I love the game. It's
Hmm.
awesome, right? But if I played that for like 3 hours and then I didn't have like a lot of like I mean I leveled up and stuff like that, but I don't really have that sense of like accomplishment.
Right.
I leave it feeling like, oh man, I just wasted my time. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then on the other hand, if I binge a Dark Souls marathon, right? Start soul level 1, right? And then by the end of that 3 or 4 hour marathon, I'm like super leveled up. I've got nice equipment. I've got like I'm in a really cool zone. Like
Hmm.
there's just such a sense of accomplishment to it. And maybe I beat a boss that I was really struggling against or that was just destroying me. And then I logged in and on this playthrough, first try, just destroyed him, right? Like there's just something that is so appealing about the way they design their games because it doesn't feel like you're playing a game. It feels like you're accomplishing something. Like you have something to prove for your time that you just spent. Does that
Right.
make any sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. There's just you can see the progression, right? You can see it in your character with the gear you have, with the level you're at. You can see it in you as just becoming a better player. You're not getting hit as much. You're definitely not dying as much. I remember Dark Souls 2, like I rarely die in that game. Because like I
Yeah, I
know all
don't
the jump
die.
things, I know what all's happening. If I do die, it's just me being it. And that's awesome. Like that's such a good feeling when you master a game.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know what was funny is that I was actually playing Uncharted 4, right?
Okay.
This is probably about like 3 or 4 months ago, and I realized something, and I was like, I die more in this game than I do in Dark Souls.
Right.
Right? Like your whole the whole thing about Dark Souls is like, oh, all you do is die in that game, right? And it's like that's not true. Like from now, since I've put hundreds of hours into the game, I don't die very often. And when I do, like, I mean, I know on our playthrough of Dark Souls 2, I've been dying a little bit, but I haven't been. I'm just not as familiar with that game as I am with
Right.
the other ones. I don't die all that often, and that's not to brag, but that's to show you that there is a sense of progression that you
Right.
get.
Hmm.
You're just a better at the game than you ever were after spending hundreds of hours. I mean, that's sort of obvious, but it's a really cool part of the game. I really appreciate that.
Oh, for sure. Dark Souls 3 is an amazing game. Or I mean, they're all good. Like you said before, you can't look at a game and be like, "Oh, that's bad." Even the worst set of the series is still fantastic. Here's a game that I haven't played. Sekiro, you have played extensively. You have
Yeah,
bugged me to play it, and I've been meaning to. I just,
it's amazing.
poor college student.
It's yeah, it's amazing.
Came
You
out
need
this
to.
year, surprisingly. It seems like it came out such a long time ago, but it came out on March 22nd, PlayStation
Yep.
4, Xbox One, Microsoft Windows. Interesting take, I would say. And it's also by Miyazaki, so
So I won't get into a rating of the whole series. That's better saved for another video. But I will tell you that that is in my top 3 of the entire series. It's that good. And that's spoken as someone who's I've done my time in the series, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just my honest opinion. Like it's just that good.
I'm definitely intending to play it. Maybe with Cyber Monday coming up tomorrow, I will definitely
Yeah.
pick it up.
The only problem is no co-op. That's the only thing. I really
Yeah,
wish we
and
could
that's
slice some people
honestly,
up
I
together,
think if co-op was in the game, I would have had it sooner.
But I love it though. There's something about it, and you'll know it once you play it. But there's something about the fact that it's just you and your katana against the whole game. It
Mm-hmm.
makes it really beautiful, like considering like you're a samurai, and it's just it adds something to it that there's no co-op. You'll see.
I'm gonna take your word for it. I've trusted you with Bloodborne. I've trusted you with other games.
But a lot of games don't have the same ability to capture it. That whole Souls magic, and like that's another thing we should talk about is like the Souls like games.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean by that? Like the whole games that come out that you hear in the media, oh, it's like Dark Souls of this, right? It's the
Right.
Dark Souls of this. And there's a lot of games that are sort of spiritual successors to it. Let's just talk about do you have some that you enjoy? Is there any of them that you don't? And what
I
even
have
is a Souls like?
I got three games that kind of come to mind. Only one of them I've played actually. I do want to play another one. One of the first ones is Neo, which I know you've played. That came out in
Yes.
February 2017 for
Great
PlayStation
game.
4 and Microsoft Windows.
Hmm.
More or less kind of a feudal Japan. Well, I guess actually not really feudal. That was more Sekiro, but old school Japan against
Yeah.
yokai demons.
Hmm.
What was your take on that game?
Well, you know what? I loved Neo. I thought it was a fantastic game. It definitely felt a lot different. It had like a Diablo style loot system where you're
Interesting.
in Dark Souls 1, pretty much actually every Dark Souls game, like you have a build in mind. Like I want to go for this weapon.
Hmm.
I know I have to beat this boss to get this soul to get this weapon, right? And you have
Right.
like I'm going to center this build around this. In Neo, it's constantly switching out different weapons for different ones, right? So you're picking up dual blades and then you're switching it out for a slightly higher damage percent, damaging spear or
Hmm.
something like that. And you're constantly switching out your equipment rather than just sticking with the same thing and leveling up. And that's actually one thing that I didn't like about Neo.
Hmm.
I like the whole system in Dark Souls that your weapon sort of feels like another character in the game towards the end of it because it's bonded to your character,
Right.
right? Like if you're going for that Dragon Slayer great axe build in Dark Souls, and then you've worked to get it, and then you have it leveled up plus 10, like it feels like you're proud of it because that's something you've
Sure.
worked for. You're not just throwing it out for another weapon every 5 minutes.
Hmm.
So I enjoyed it, but then once Sekiro came out, I'm like, okay, this is better in like every single aspect.
Right.
So,
Right. The second one that I had listed down was Code Vein, which
mhm.
you've heard about. I'm pretty sure came
Weeb
out.
Souls,
It's
yes.
it's Weep Souls. It came out this year. Actually, not long ago, September 27th, 2019. PlayStation 4, Xbox One,
Wow.
Microsoft Windows. That's how I mean, that's, yeah, I agree. Weep Souls, that's kind of how I describe it. It's kind of an anime, futuristic. It's got a storyline that's a lot more user friendly. I mean, it's more
Yeah.
given to you than any other lore in the Souls series, but
Mhm.
definitely not for everyone. Mostly due to the anime side of it.
I'll
I
definitely
I,
check it out at
I
some
like it.
point.
Yeah, once it goes on sale, I'll probably pick it up. But yeah, it's definitely one that fits in. A lot of people compared it to the Soul series. That's why it's on the list. The third one that I have, and the last one that I have, which is probably the furthest from the list in my opinion, but still, close enough, was the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. We've talked about it
Love
numerous
it.
times on this series, on this podcast.
Love the game. It's great.
It was amazing. Definitely some interesting points, which
Definitely not a Souls game though.
we do plan on talking about and having a dedicated podcast to this game later at a later date. But it's close enough. It has enough mechanics to be considered in the same sphere as the Souls, but
Mhm.
also too many mechanics that kind of push it away.
Yeah, like the things in Jedi Fallen Order that make it very similar to a Souls game is they have the same sort of, bonfire,
Yeah.
spawn point sort of idea.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same sort of lock on and dodge combat style.
Right.
It just you play the game and you'll understand that it feels like a mix of like Dark Souls, Uncharted, and like old school Metroid. That's
Hmm.
what it really feels like to
Yeah, I
me.
can see that.
But it's great. It's just definitely not a Souls game.
It's funny.
But
It's
it's
funny to say because one of the reasons I think it's not really a Souls game is it's almost too polished, and it's a weird kind of, you got to get used to saying that, but
Well, yeah. I
Dark
mean,
Souls is buggy. You know, it's there's
yeah,
things that don't make sense that happen,
yeah,
and you get used to it, and that's what makes sense. But it's almost like Jedi Fallen Order is almost too smooth.
yeah. I definitely agree. And the difference in the major difference for me is that you're not trying to piece together some story based off some item descriptions. You know,
Right,
like
right.
you have like a cinematic level story unfolding before your eyes that you're watching, that you're witnessing. It's different in a lot of aspects. Because in Dark Souls one, dude, and you know what? Not even just one, the whole series. What's even going on? I have
I
no
mean,
idea.
yeah, it's confusing
Dude,
for
some guy
sure.
doesn't like fire and some other people do. Like what is going on? Like I feel like that's the whole thing about it. And but when you have gameplay that's as good and rewarding as that, it doesn't really matter. And I
Right.
sort of like their minimalistic approach to the story. It
Hmm.
definitely adds some immersiveness to it.
I agree
So,
100%. Have any last comments? Any last concerns? Things you
my
want to
last
talk
comment would
about?
be, if anyone's watching this and haven't played the series, what are you doing? Like
Yeah.
you need to get into this series and watch it, and then come back and watch this episode again and see how you're feeling, because an experience, and it's something that I wish every person who loves video games as much as we do would be able to experience.
And I will reiterate this before we end. Give it time.
Don't give up instantly. That's
Don't give
100% right.
up. It's a hard game to learn. Google's your friend, right? So it can help you with
Yes.
finding gear. It can help you, hey, where do I need to go? What should I be doing right now?
Hmm.
How should
And
I level up best? Use Google, but give it time.
use Google, and remember, so don't give up, and most of all, don't you dare go hollow. That's a Dark Souls 1 quote.
That yes, that is play the game, come back, listen. That'll make sense. As always, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for listening. Follow us at Gaming is the Mission on YouTube and Instagram. We post a new podcast every Wednesday and Sunday, so come check us out. Matt, thanks for coming on the podcast, filling in for Lazy Nick's absence. It's been a lot of fun, man. I really enjoyed doing this podcast.
I've loved it. Thanks for having me as a guest, man.
Of course. All right, guys, take care.